So my name is Suzanne Balet Haight of Ballet Flowers and Design. This year is a little bit different than others. We're opening, but a slow opening due to the weather and everything that's happening. So we're trying to get an online system ready that people can pre-order and have garden side or curbside pickup at our greenhouse. So that's kind of exciting, and we should have it up and running by tomorrow, which is fantastic for the weekend. And today we're going to talk a little bit about shade gardening and uh, beyond hostas. A few things that a lot of people have shade gardens and they're not sure what to add to the planting or how to add or where to add. So these are just a few tips on shade gardening to think about as you are assessing your own garden and what you want to add in the future. So think about the color in your garden, whether it's foliage or flowers, texture, bloom time, the height of the plants, so one is not blocking the other. The soil, some people have irrigation and the soil is very wet, and other people have very dry soil because it's under a tree. Think of the lighting, whether it is full shade or possibly part shade, where you can have a little bit more flexibility in some of the plant material. And also think about the care. How much care do you want to do, and how much time do you want to be in your garden? Most of us want to be in the garden all the time, but it's just the time factor, whether with all our family obligations and work obligations. So this is a picture I wanted to show you because it has like a little bit of everything that I was talking about. You have the texture of the different foliage. Let's see, I have a pointer here. And a laser, so there we go. So the purple, the larger leaf next to the variegated grass, it looks like an Echorus, and then the leaves of the iris before it's bloomed. I believe that's the yellow iris. It loves water. You have some water plants in there, but the mulch around it kind of accents, and you can see some of the plants a little bit better. And then you also have other features besides the color of the plants. You have features of the rock and the water feature, which gives you more dimension within a shade garden. So just other options to think about as you're choosing plant material and the layout. Also another garden that's part shade, you have Japanese maple. This is actually a rose, a white rose, but I wanted to show you it because the white anemone has the same effect as the white rose. Whirlwind white anemone is fantastic. It gives a nice tall flavor of white in the garden, or September charm if you wanted some pink. But it's a nice height that brings your eye back. Also the color of the foliage, so the yellow, the burgundies, the variegated, this is Francis William Hosta. You have lamium in the front, a few annuals, and I have a closer up view of a few. There's Blackie sweet potato vine, which was just added as an accent plant to the area. And then a begonia, also great in the shade. And we have lamium, beacon silver, Hakinakloa, all gold. Let's see, back here is the Japanese painted fern, which has the sunlight in this picture is kind of whitening it out, but it's actually variegated with silver and green, and it accents other plant material too. And it makes you look into the garden rather than a flat top of green. The geranium carmina, this is a great spring flowering geranium, which gives you a little bit earlier color than most other plants. And then a tradescantia, which has a deep purple color. The Concord grape is a great one because it doesn't spread like other tradescantia or spiderwort. having something that stays in its clump and is more maintained in certain areas is definitely easier maintenance. And so this is a begonia, but I put in here that this could also be a Virginia or a Helleborus, which will give you early spring color if you wanted a perennial rather than dappling in with an annual. The pink bleeding heart, Dicentra spectabilis, also will give you height and early spring color. Alliums can be interspersed within a shade garden, and a lot of times you think of sun, but the alliums start to bloom before the leaves come out, especially the purple sensation allium. So that's a May bloomer, and that will grow in sun or shade and give you some height and kind of a mystical feeling within the garden. The garlic chives also I have found they grow in full sun to full shade, also giving you that height in July. A few other height items, Lobelia blue fan, which is cardinal flower. So cardinal flower can come in blue, red. The red is the most common, but I wanted to give you an idea that there are other options. And foxglove, Foxy, is one of my favorites because it's a perennial foxglove versus a biennial. It doesn't grow as high as the biennial types, but Foxy blooms the first year, and it gives you a nice height, about 3 to 4 feet in height, and that'll grow in full sun to full shade. Matricaria ultra double. Feverfew, there's a variety of different feverfews, but the ultra double is one of my favorites because it does give you a little bit of height, about 2 feet, sometimes 3 feet the second year, and it blooms the first year, and gives you a nice like lightening in the garden, because shade gardens need that white or greens or things that like lift up the darkness and kind of bring your eye through the garden rather than on top. And this is the Feverfew Ultra Double mixed in with a couple different hostas, but we also have this purple meadow sage and Lismachia. Both the Lismachia and the purple meadow sage, I wanted to show you this because it only gets about 3 hours of western sunlight in this location, and you can incorporate plants, certain plants that have great characteristics that will accent the garden. So think about your lighting, and there may be some of these great plants that you can incorporate into the mix. Because if it was just feverfew and hostas, and this is Calamagrostis brachytrichtis, I love to say that name, Korean feather reedgrass, and that grows in sun or shade, and that's a nice textural in the backdrop. But just the hosta, the feverfew, and the green, that would give you more of a white garden. But then adding that purple and yellow just kind of livens it up in the right setting. Actia or Simissifuga. This is one of my favorites. It blooms in the fall, September, but it also gives that height within the shade garden. It doesn't, because it blooms later, you have to wait for it, but it's worth the wait because it stands tall, strong, and it never flops over. It just has a nice appearance to it. Another couple tall items that I wanted to show you, Ligularia the rocket. This one, it will grow in full shade to full sun, but only in full sun if it has moisture. It likes wet feet, so it would be a good plant to put near a pond. If you have really dry conditions, it doesn't always do as well. It usually shrinks down in size and doesn't grow as tall. But if you have adequate moisture, the Ligularia, the rocket, that grows fantastic. And a shrub behind it is Annabelle hydrangea. Incrediball is another variety, and that has more of a June flowering bloom, and it's white at first and then it turns green. So it has a lot of interesting characteristics to it. Let's see. And then we also, here is the Endless Summer hydrangea, but you can see there aren't as many blossoms on it. I like to insulate my Endless Summer hydrangeas with straw and wrap it with burlap for the winter. And that gives it just a little bit more insulation where it'll grow and bloom on old wood. If I do that, then I have much more success on the number of flowers that come out on my Endless Summer. I think I just get lazy at my house and I insulate for other people instead of our own. But we did have one beautiful Endless Summer here. And it's more pink because the soil is more alkaline. And if you acidify the soil, then it'll turn more blue. A couple other heights, there's different types of astilbe. This one is called granat, and astilbe will bloom the early part of July, June and early part of July. And Campanula glomerata, it's a globe campanula, and this also gives you a nice June, July bloomer. When other things are almost ready to bloom, these are a fantastic one to add. And all of these will grow in full shade to part shade, and some of them will grow in full sun as well. There's also another grass, northern sea oats, Chasmanthium. This is one that will grow in full sun to full shade, but you do want to make sure that you're watching out for it because it will self-seed in random areas, so you just have to keep that in check. And the Calamagrostis brachytrichtis, the Korean feather reed grass, is in the back here. And these are all north-facing, more shaded area. This picture, I just wanted to show you the green of the hydrangea, the Annabelle hydrangea. So it's still beautiful after the white has blossomed. So it gives you a different effect and as your garden is changing through the season. And this is more sun where the phlox and the echinacea are in here, but I want you to think about black-eyed Susans as also an option for shade, because they do bloom. They may not bloom as prolifically as full sun, but they do bloom in shade as well. So if you need a little touch of yellow or something to brighten the area, that's another option. A few shrubs to think about for height: viburnum. This is popcorn viburnum or snowball viburnum. And this also, it looks like a little hydrangea, but it blooms in May. And there's also Viburnum mauricii. I love that one because it's got more buds and florets on it. Weigela is another one that I've grown in, I would say not dense shade, but part shade where it gets 3/4 of a day of shade and just a tiny bit of sun. And you'll still get nice flowers to it. French lace, I love. It's a combination of the variegated Weigela and the wine and roses. So it's the deep pink of the wine and roses with the variegated white and green foliage. Gorgeous. In this picture, there's plants that will grow in sun and shade. So for shade, the lady's mantle is fantastic. It has that chartreuse flower on it. And it's a nice border plant because the foliage looks like a coral bell, but it's really nice green, and it captures little dewdrops of water within the leaves. So it's fun to play with kids, and kind of like catch the drops within the leaves. Coral bells, also fantastic. This one is purple pallas, so you can get different foliage colorations with the coral bells. Purple pallas is one that will grow in full sun to full shade, but there's many of the coral bells definitely need part sun to more shade. And Penstemon Husker's red is through here. This is a white flower with a burgundy foliage. It's in front of the Japanese iris, but it gives you kind of that effect. It's kind of like fireworks coming out of the plant, and it gives a nice whitening to any garden. And it loves shade. There's also one called, it's Penstemon. It's it looks very similar, but it has purple flower on it. And I think I have a close-up picture of, this is just the purple Pallas, the Husker's red penstemon, and then you have Japanese iris in the back. And Japanese iris, they will, or Siberian iris, and they will bloom in the shade, but they really need a little bit of sun to have a prolific bloom. A few different coral bells, peach parfait, the purple Pallas, um, cinnabar, and rose granita. These are just options, but the cinnabar, I love this one because it has like the underside of the leaf is a little bit pinkish, and then they have like pink spikes that come up from it, and it has a little bit longer blooming period than some of the other coral bells. And we have peach melba, rose granita. You can see the foliage would really stand out in the landscape. Heucherella is a combination between heuchera and tyrella. Tyrellas are also great in the shade, but a lot of times their habit is that they spread, and the heucherellas stay in their clump. This is Heucherella sunspot, next to a heuchera or coral bells, plum crazy. Jack Frost brunera gives you a nice lightening within the edge of the garden. It only grows about 10 inches tall. So bringing in that light with the foliage is fantastic. There's the variety that is, that most of the bruneras come from, Brunera macrophylla, that has a heart-shaped green leaf, but all of them have the blue forget-me-not-like flowers, and that blooms in May and June, and just fantastic. Many people kind of think that they're forget-me-nots, but they're actually Brunera. So it's one plant that is, in my opinion, a long-lasting forget-me-not, because the foliage keeps going and going and going, and the flowers are in the spring. There's other varieties too that are fantastic. Looking Glass, and there's a few different varieties of variegated ones. This is another type of campanula, Campanula pascariana, and it's a campanula that blooms all summer, and from spring to summer, fall, and it creeps along the ground. It's similar to I guess it would be a good edging plant. Variegated Jacob's ladder is another one that has the variegated foliage, and it blooms a light blue flower in the spring. And it grows about 12 to 15 inches, depending on the lighting and the moisture. This is a spreading Jacob's ladder, which also blooms in May, and the foliage is so hardy on it. It just looks beautiful all the time, and whether it's in bloom or not in bloom, it just is a nice green mat to it. And all of these are great for shade. We have, okay, so I probably grow way too many of these, but I love them. Geranium Roseanne, and the reason I grow, we saw Geranium Carmina before, and that only blooms in the spring. Geranium Biocovo is in the back. That also only blooms in the spring, but has a fantastic white color to it that with the pink, buds, and it just stands out nicely in the landscape. But Roseanne, it just starts blooming in June, and then it keeps going and going and going and going and going all summer long, and that's what I love about it. It always gives you color. If you're looking for other ground covers, the few I have here are ones that would spread. Lismachia creeping Jenny, that would be a good one for a border type plant. It will creep into and underneath other plants. So you want it, if you want to keep that in check, you just need to maintain it a little bit more. And Lily of the Valley is fantastic in shade, but it does get aggressive in spots, but you can't beat those flowers. Those little bells in May, it's just gorgeous. Another spreader is the lamium, beacon silver. There's also lamium, the white Nancy. So it depends on the flower color that you would want on the ground cover. This one also, once you get it established, it can creep into other areas, but it's easy to pull out and weed out and keep in check in the right spots. And then Korean feather reed grass, love that one. Another angle, this is the beacon silver, lamium, Francis William Hosta. There's a few daylilies in the front here that'll bloom later. So sometimes daylilies can give you a little bit of color if it's part shade or part sun. Japanese painted fern, the Carmina geranium. You have the tall allium in the backdrop here. Ferns are also a great mix with the like taller ferns or Solomon seal. Also fantastic. I love the variegated Solomon seal. I'm not sure I have a picture in the slideshow of that, but the variegation and then the bells on it are just gorgeous. I also wanted you to think about succulents in the front of your shade garden, like the sempervirens. They can grow in less sun, so you can grow sedums in less sun. You know, it'll depend on your irrigation level, and if it gets more water, the plants will be a little bit leggier. So you just want to make sure you're choosing the right sedums for the right spot. But definitely the lower types are much better for a border type plant. But add interest. If you're walking up to it or you have a sculpture and you just want something low next to it, it could work. And it could be a pot of succulents instead of planted in the ground, just to give you a little bit of interest. Adding annuals, I also feel like could be fantastic in a shade garden. Sometimes your shade garden seems a little bit too green and you just want some pep, something that will just keep growing. So you have Terrenia. Terrenia is probably one of my favorite shade plants, as well as tuberous begonias. Oh, here's a tuberous begonia over here. And geraniums will grow in less light. You just don't get quite as many blooms as if they were in sun. So it still gives you an effect that is fantastic. Oh, and I noticed some Annabelle hydrangeas back there. Love those. So you have a little bit of green color in the back. Pansies are also fantastic this time of year and through the season. They like the shade because they'll have a cooler environment than if they were in full sun. A few annual planters that you could incorporate. We have Gardenmeister fuchsia, which gives you a little bit of a height and an orangey coral color. Sweet potato vine, whether it's a dark foliage or a lime. The tuberous begonia, the begonia hymelis is my favorite because it will grow in full sun to full shade. One thing you do want to keep track of is how much moisture they're getting, because if they do have wet feet for a long period of time, they'll rot out at the bottom. But if you can keep them drier and have them water, forget about them and don't water them as much, they usually do better. Different coleuses are also fantastic. Diamond frost, and this one isn't in bloom, but it's dragon wing begonia. A couple other, the different coleuses. Browalia is another one, the blue purple. That is fantastic in shade. And different kinds of begonias. This is the begonia hymelis rose. And then you have diamond frost euphorbia there. All of these will do great in shade. Even the Dusty Miller, that'll grow great in shade or sun. Ivies, shade or sun. Dichondra, shade or sun. Asparagus fern, Springeria asparagus fern, also shade or sun with the begonia. And then this is the blue Terrenia with white impatiens, vinca, all options for shade if you wanted to incorporate annual color. That's the blue Terrenia, frosty night alyssum, a couple of the begonia hymelis varieties, coleus, other begonias, sweet potato vine. I'm just kind of going through these a little bit quicker just so you get an idea of names of types. Sweet potato vine, Ipomea, sweet Caroline, keystone copper coleus, Dracaena will grow in sun or shade, the grassy. Here's another picture of the Gardenmeister, fuchsia, coleus, the dragonwing begonia through here, and then in the back there's the hymelis begonias. New Guinea impatiens, fantastic in the shade. Sedums, these were a couple different ones within this pot that could work. Purple Emperor is this one. Sedum Carl, variegated sedum. Sedum Vera Jameson, and this I couldn't tell exactly what kind of sedum that was, but I thought maybe it could be Golden Acre sedum because that has like a limey green color to it, and I think it would have been a nicer accent to it, but it is a spreading sedum. So sometimes you can dig up some divisions from your gardens and pot them up into planters. So it's all like being creative with gardening. If you want, so in the fall, you would want to plant some bulbs. So these are crocus, hyacinths, daffodils. There's a variety that would give you like that spring color, but you have to think about that in the fall for what's to come in the spring, because that's the best time to plant. And then dapple them in different areas within the garden, and then you have blossoms now. Our hyacinths are blooming, our daffodils are blooming, so it's a sure sign of spring. And then this is just another close-up of a few of our gardens, a few of garden pictures that I wanted to show you just as far as the colors go. And you can see there's a birdhouse in the garden, so adding a feature also gives some interest within the garden. So you want to think like, how can I make my garden better, and what can I add to make it like I can't wait to get out there, or I can't wait to see this, or I want to add a sculpture, or I want to add a bird bath, or just maybe it's a couple rocks that just accent another plant, and the plant can grow over it. And that other picture, we had a blue chair in it, so it could be a piece of furniture or a bench or a place to sit in the garden. This was a map that we drew up of a few different ideas for a new perennial garden that was shade. Many of you might already have a shade garden, but you want to think about the front of the garden, middle, back, or how it's oriented, because if it's around a circle, then maybe you want some low going around the circle and then taller in the center. So this has just lower plants in the front, medium height, and then taller. And we have maps of these at the greenhouse if anybody was interested. And there's alternative plants on the back of a sheet like this. So you can sub out something in the front with maybe you want Roseanne geranium, or maybe you want some ajuga creeping along the edge of a pond area. So there's a couple different options. So that concludes the presentation.